So President Xi's out there at the moment saying that food waste is something which this country cannot really afford, and they're taking measures to stop food waste from growing. What are your thoughts on this?
I think he's right. I mean, the campaign Operation Empty Plate is definitely a good initiative and should be adopted nationwide from a food waste management perspective. I think it helps to some extent, but but in terms of solving the food security, especially the long-term food security challenge China is confronted with, is not necessarily the most solid long-term solution. Because if you look at food waste, it's actually it's not just with consumers, but it's also everywhere. I would give you an example, like China is indeed wasting food, but about one-sixth, I think, of the food waste, like the total grain produced in China is wasted annually in the production, processing, and transportation food because poor equipment and logistical issues. So from my perspective, we can break down actually the food security challenge into kind of two aspects of the food security issue we need to examine for China. So one is the grain or crop security. The other one is probably more relevant to what we are talking about, is more like a meat and protein security, as you pointed out, Rich.
Tao, doesn't the timing interest you here as well? We've had these huge floods. We've also had health scares, and not to mention what's been happening with COVID. So Is there a food shortage in China? Is that really what it's about ultimately?
I think, in terms of grain security, I think as China is pretty much self-sufficient, if you look at a self-sufficient ratio of, the major staple food products like wheat, rice, and corn is pretty high in China. It's over 95%. But on the other hand, if you look at, China's protein security, I think because China has a great reliance on imported soybeans, and most of the imported soybeans are being used to raise farm animals for the livestock industry to feed the farm raised animals, so people can have more meat to eat. I think that's probably where the real challenge or the structure challenge lies in, I would say, long term. But if you look at the short-term impact factors, the pandemic, flooding in China, economic decline, U.S.-China trade war, all these things are happening, but they are having more like a psychological impact on the food security issue or people perception of food security in China. But I think China's challenge in terms of food security is more like the protein security or meat security I have pointed out. That's more like a structural issue that China needs to resolve, for long term.
Tao, you say you're not too concerned about grain security, but reports have suggested that we could see a grain supply gap by 2025, and that's because the rural workforce is shrinking. How real is this risk, and why are you not that concerned then?
But basically, if you look at what China has been doing, is structure in terms of food security structure. China basically has focused on its most of this arable land on planting of wheat, rice, and corn. And also, China has developed hybrid grain, hybrid rice, and hybrid maize technology of the past years. This technology has been developed by a consortium of Chinese scientists. So they basically solved the grain security issue in China over the past years. So I think China is pretty self-sufficient. But in short term, there could be problems related to how you allocate the different kind of resources to different people, to different geographies. Because of flooding, because economic decline and things like that. But that's more like a market or even government allocation kind of issue. But as in terms of what they have, particularly the major staple food products, wheat, rice, and corn. I think China has what it has, what it takes to meet the domestic demand. So I think the challenge is still more lies on the protein aspects of food security.
To that end, how prepared is China to overcome the challenges?
What we do, so we promote and develop, plant-based or alternative protein products in China. I think that's one way, for China to solve the protein security challenge long term. But that's going to take time. So you need, good entrepreneurs, you need good scientists, you need, government policy support in order to truly create this kind of alternative protein industry, in order to replace China's reliance on imported soybeans.
But it's all about importing, isn't it, ultimately? Australia, of course, we've got a big story appearing today, how China, as a dairy giant Mengyu, has had to end an Australian deal to buy Kirin's Lion brands there in Australia. That's down to the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, saying that it wasn't in the national interest. We've got, of course, them importing more from the US because of the Phase 1 trade deal. That dependence on external food supply is actually probably the cornerstone of all this, and they can't get around that, can they?
Short term, I don't think they can do that. Actually, even long term, I think the de-globalization will definitely impair the global supply chain. If you look at some of the countries who are restricting food exports, because of pandemic, that's seriously also impacting people's livelihoods, both in China and also elsewhere. So I think, from my perspective, so the food security issue is not just internal in China, but it's also a global issue. So there's definitely, because different countries, they live in a globally integrated food system nowadays. So it's really hard to just, de-globalize and go back to their own countries, inner loop kind of economy, so to speak. So that's going to be hard to do short term. Even long term, I think, it's full of challenges. But at the same time, different countries, understandably, they need to worry about their own domestic food security challenges. So that's why, as for China, it's because, they have, the narrative for China is often in terms of food security is that they have 7% of the world's arable land, 6% of the world's fresh water, but they need to feed 22% of the world's population. So the challenge is always there. So from my perspective, China needs to, put in resources, put in time, and also a lot of patience to develop the alternative protein solutions for itself.
Tao, given that backdrop, what is your investment strategy? How are you capitalizing?
Yeah, basically, we invest in entrepreneurs. We support entrepreneurs in this space. This is still a nascent space in China, although China has a long history of plant-based food. But I think the definition of plant-based or alternative protein nowadays that people in the U.S. and Europe are used to is very much different from the China's traditional concept of plant-based. So that's what we're trying to do. Is basically we do investments, we do incubation of entrepreneurs. We just launched Dao Foods Incubator back in April this year. Our goal is to within 3 years to invest and support 30 alternative protein ventures in China, so we can have an army of entrepreneurs that who can come up with the right products to appeal to mainstream consumers and hopefully create sufficient consumer awareness of this kind of what we call next generation good food product. So this kind of alternative protein products can eventually stand on their own.